My dad's side of the family treated me like a nobody because my mom was just his mistress, while my half-brother was treated like the apple of their eyes because he was born from a legitimate marriage and will be the rightful heir of everything he owns. Now they're scrambling because I was the only one my dad left everything to and revealed this shocking reason behind it. He read the usual formalities about debts and charitable donations, then came the part that flipped the room upside down. To my daughter, the only child who ever saw me as a man instead of a paycheck, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes my shares in the company, my home, my private accounts, and all remaining personal assets. The silence was so loud I could hear the second hand on the wall clock ticking. Elaine was the first to break it. She said, "That must have been a mistake." She demanded to know if there had been a second, well, a newer one that made sense. Mr. Bernstein calmly said this was the most recent legally binding version, signed and notarized only 2 months prior. He even held it up for them to see. Alex stood up like he was ready to fight someone. He asked what kind of joke this was. He said I wasn't even really family. He said I was a mistake and that I didn't deserve any of it. My hand stayed folded in my lap, but my nails were digging into my palms. I didn't flinch. Then Elaine asked the big question, why? Why would my father, who practically raised Alex as his golden child, do this? Mr. Bernstein looked at me and then reached for a sealed envelope from the file. He said my father had written a personal letter to be read aloud in the event of his death. I hadn't known about that. My stomach turned. The letter was short, handwritten. It started with a few lines about regret, about how he had made choices in his life to protect his image, to preserve a false sense of family, to avoid conflict. He wrote that while he loved all of us, only one of them had ever seen him fully and accepted him anyway. He talked about me, how I never asked him for anything more than time, how I had forgiven him again and again even when he failed me, how I showed him what loyalty looked like, not through words but through quiet understanding. He admitted he had failed me, that he had allowed his family to treat me like a shadow, that he never stood up for me the way he should have, and that it ate away at him year after year. Then came the most shocking part. He wrote that Alex had stolen from him substantial amounts of money, that Elaine had known and helped cover it up to avoid embarrassment, that this wasn't a rumor, it was backed by evidence, which he had given to Mr. Bernstein to share with the board of his company if anyone contested the will. You could hear a pin drop after that. Alex's face was red with rage. Elaine looked like she had been punched. She kept insisting that my father must have been manipulated or unwell when he wrote that. But Mr. Bernstein calmly stated that my father had taken every legal and medical precaution to confirm he was of sound mind when finalizing the will. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My body was frozen. I had come expecting a simple formality, maybe a gesture of closure. I never expected to be handed everything they thought would be theirs. I never expected the man who always kept me in the shadows to finally pull me into the light. When the meeting was over, Elaine stormed out first. Alex followed, still shouting about how this wasn't over and how I'd regret it. I didn't respond. My mind was still stuck on the phrase from the letter, the only child who ever saw me as a man. I stayed a little longer to ask Mr. Bernstein what this meant for the company, for the estate, for the fallout I was now about to walk into. He said it meant a lot of paperwork, a lot of decisions, and possibly a lot of unwanted attention. But he said I had every legal right to everything that had been given to me. I walked out of that office not with triumph but with a quiet, stunned heaviness. For so long, I had been ignored, dismissed, and shoved aside, and now, suddenly, I held the keys to a kingdom I was never meant to enter. But this wasn't about revenge. At least, not for me. Update 2. News travels fast when there's money involved. By the next morning, I'd already received a series of emails from the company board requesting a meeting with me as the new primary shareholder. Apparently, my father hadn't just handed me a bank account and a few properties. He had left me controlling interest in the very company my half-brother used to brag he'd take over one day. I didn't even know how to feel. I hadn't planned for any of this. I worked a regular office job, paid my rent on time, and lived a quiet life. But now, just like that, I was sitting on top of assets and responsibilities worth millions. And then came the texts. One from my cousin, a half-hearted attempt to check in and see how I was holding up. Another from an aunt who hadn't spoken to me in years, saying we should catch up soon. I deleted them without replying. But the one that stopped me in my tracks was from Alex. He said we needed to talk, that there had to be a misunderstanding, that Dad must have written the will in a moment of confusion, and that I knew deep down it was meant for him. He even had the nerve to ask if I could at least share the inheritance since he had always been like a brother to me. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Instead, I called Mr. Bernstein and asked for help arranging security for my father's estate. I had a bad feeling that something was coming, and I was right. That weekend, I went back to my father's house for the first time in years. It still didn't feel like mine. Everything was pristine and cold, just like Elaine had always kept it. No family photos of me, just elegant decorations, spotless surfaces, and portraits of Alex from every stage of his life. I wasn't there to redecorate or make changes. I just needed time to process. But I wasn't alone for long. Elaine showed up unannounced. She let herself in using her old key, something I made a note to change immediately, and walked through the front door like she still owned the place. She didn't even look at me. She just said she was there to collect a few personal things. I reminded her that everything in the house now legally belonged to me and that she needed to make a list and go through proper channels. She laughed like I was being dramatic. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. You don't belong here. You're nothing but a walking reminder of your mother's shame. I had heard variations of that sentiment my whole life, but this time was different. This time, she was standing in the foyer, talking down to me like she still had the upper hand. I told her the visit was over and that she needed to leave. She tried to argue, said she'd call the police if I laid a finger on her. I told her to go ahead. I'd love for the authorities to show up and hear about how she tried to steal from a house she no longer had any claim to. That shut her up. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. That night, I walked through the house alone, room by room, trying to make sense of it all. I found an old box tucked behind some files in my father's study. Inside were photographs of me and him from when I was younger, photos I'd never seen before, me sitting on his shoulders at the zoo, us laughing over ice cream, a few birthday cards I had written him, the handwriting painfully childish. There was a small note inside too.